Hello folks, I'm Trev Makes It Easy, the channel where we make learning easy. In this series, Trev on Econ, I'll be taking you through topics you're likely to run into in any introductory course in economics at the college or university level. My goal is to make economics less scary, more approachable, and, if I can, mildly enjoyable. With that being said, let's make it easy. All right, folks, let's get started again. Today we're going to deal with double events. This is the more complicated movement of supply and demand graphs that deal with two events happening at the same time. So you'll notice our setup is very similar to the last video. This time though, like I said, we're doing double events, which are going to be two different things are happening at the same time. One will affect demand and one will affect supply. Right? You're going to notice here that whenever we have two events, one will be supply, one will be demand. The reason we don't do two demands or two supplies is because then it gets tricky, because if you move demand right and then left, it might not go back to the start point. What if the right was more powerful, the left was more powerful? So whenever we see double events, we tend to see one doing demand, one doing supply. Now, does it have to be that way? No, but we're going to teach this from what I would call a most common perspective. So with these, there's again four new combinations. There is demand increase, supply increase. There is demand decrease, supply increase. There's demand increase, supply decrease. And finally, there is the last option, which is both decreasing. You can try. There are no other combinations. All right, these are all the combinations of directions we can see when both demand and supply are moving. All right. Now, the thing is, we're going to do a lot of things the same way, okay? We're going to start from our starting point like we have here in our four pictures. Then we're going to shift the relevant curves in the relevant directions. And then we're going to assess, well, what happened to price and quantity? Now, I've mentioned before this section is more difficult. There's a couple reasons. Number one, there's just a lot of movement. The movement can make the graphs a little messy, which is why I like this in video format, so you can go back, pause, and all that good stuff to see the steps in action. The other difficulty is that the answers aren't as clear-cut as they were in the single movements, okay? And you'll see what I mean in the very first picture. In fact, the very first one we're going to do is going to be the longest of the four because it's going to introduce the big sort of problem with double event problems. And once we understand that, then the next three should be easier. So this one is a demand increase and a supply increase. So all we're going to do is we're going to do both of those in order. It doesn't really have to be in order, but we're going to do them as listed. So I'm going to take my demand and I'm going to shift it to the right because, again, demand increase. Same thing we did last time. I'm just going to call this D2. I'm going to put an arrow. I have shifted my demand. Now note, demand and supply are crossing up here now, but this is not what we're interested in. We want both curves to shift. So we now need to do the same thing with supply. So supply is here. It's going to increase, meaning shift to the right. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to call it again S2. Mention that I've shifted to the right. And now we've done the movements themselves. Now, a couple things we have to be careful of. Number one, because we move two curves, there's a lot of intersection points. There's one here, there's one here, and there's one here. We only care about the one that has the two new curves. So S2 and D2, they intersect right here. So this is the intersection we're concerned with. Now, what did we do last time? Well, we dotted out that dot. So let's do that thing too. So, okay. So we got P2 and that's going to be awkward. So I'll just put it kind of here. You'll see that there's a bit of a problem. And then Q2. Maybe less of a problem here. Okay. This is where the interpretation gets difficult, because I think most people can see that Q2 is bigger than Q1, so I can pretty confidently say quantity has increased. Okay, we won't write it down yet, and we'll just talk about why in a second. The price poses a bit of a problem, because right now it makes sense to say that it looks like P1 and P2 are the same. Or maybe P2 is a little higher than P1, so maybe it's an increase. The answer is a little more complicated than that. So we're going to pause on this picture for a second, and we're going to scroll down to 3 more pictures down here. Okay, I'm going to steal this phrasing here. So I'm going to take this phrasing, the demand increase, supply increase, and I'm going to do it 3 times to show you a particular problem that occurs. Okay, so the problem with supply and demand shifts is that at this level, we only discuss direction. So we say left or right. The thing we don't say is left by how much, right by how much, magnitude. We don't say how much the curve should move, distance-wise. So I want to show you why that's a problem. Let's go through and draw this thing. We'll play by the rules and draw what it says, but we're going to get a different answer every time. So let's take demand and move it to there. I'm not going to name them just for the sake of time. And let's take supply and move it about the same distance. Okay. So I get an equilibrium right here. And because I drew them moving the same distance, I'm going to get my quantity increases. So we can again say that comfortably. And because I purposely drew it like this, I'm going to say price stays the same. Okay. Again, this is one very particular way of drawing it. I followed the rules, demand increase, supply increase. Price looks like it's the same, quantity has increased. I'm going to draw it again, but this time I'm going to take my demand curve and I'm going to move it way out here. Okay, massive shift in demand. But my supply, I'm still going to increase it, but I'm only going to increase my supply a little bit. So that leaves me up here. Well, if we dot that out, we get a very different answer, right? Price has definitely gone up here, and yet again, quantity has increased. So we can write that in. Price increases, quantity increases. Let's try one more time. This time I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to make supply move a lot, and I'm going to make demand move just a little bit. Okay. Well, now my equilibrium is down here. And this result is that P has actually gone down and quantity has increased. So again, we can write that down. So we have a dilemma, okay? We've followed the instructions of demand and supply both increasing in all 3 pictures. However, only the quantity has been the same in all 3. In all 3, the quantity did increase. So we're pretty certain that quantity is going to increase. But the price changed in every single one. Sometimes it stayed the same, sometimes it increased, sometimes it decreased. And this creates a really weird, interesting answer where the answer truly is, I don't know. Okay. Now we have a word for this in economics. So if we go back up to the top, we know, like I said, that quantity increases. We are happy with that. But price, we don't know what it's going to do. So we use a phrase called ambiguous. Ambiguous simply means I don't know. All right, or it depends. It depends if I move demand more than supply, or if I move supply more than demand, right? Whichever one I use more actively, it would take over. But since it doesn't tell us, we just don't know, okay? My general rule of thumb is this. When you draw it out, try to move your curves about the same distance. If you move them about the same distance, you'll get a picture like we have here, where one is very clearly changing, and one really, I don't think that's changing that much. And effectively what you can do is the one that doesn't look like it's doing much, we'll call that one ambiguous. Okay. Now, big star point. In double event problems, P or Q will be ambiguous. Okay. You will always have one of the two things be ambiguous in a two movement problem. Now, the only time that changes is if they do tell you the amount they're moving. So you might occasionally get a question that says demand moves more than supply, or supply moves more than demand, or less, or some sort of variable that says I'm giving you the direction. If that happens, then you can just do what they say. All right. So for example, if they told you, oh, demand moves more than supply, well, then it's going to be a picture like this. And I would recommend exaggerate the movements like this. Make the demand go super far and supply only go a little. Then it makes it very clear what's happening. In my experience, these types of questions are rare, so I would focus more on this idea here, that you should end up with something being ambiguous. All right. Now, again, you're probably going to want to rewatch this video a few times. It is a tough one to grasp. This is definitely one of the harder sections of any sort of intro to economics course, so make sure you're giving it that love and attention it needs. Now, let's move on to the second one and kind of get an idea of how we can apply this process without having to draw those 3 extra graphs every single time. That would be very tedious. So, in this one, we have demand decreasing. Okay, so like I said, they haven't told me amounts, so I'm just going to move it, let's say to there. But when I go to draw the supply movement, what I would recommend is just make sure you move it about the same distance. You're not going to be perfect, like don't break out a ruler for this, but if I have supply here, I'm going to move it to about there and say, that looks about the same distance. Maybe not exact, but pretty close. And then again, find your equilibrium. So the new curve S2 and the new curve D2, well, they're intersecting right about here. And again, if I dot it out, see how, again, it's pretty damn close to Q1. So I'm just going to put Q2 right below it. But P2, I think everyone would agree, is for sure lower than P1. Right? See what I mean by one change is quite obvious and the other one is like questionable at best? So in this one, I could say price decreases, and this time it's quantity that's ambiguous, right? Because again, it looks to be about the same. We can't use the word the same, so we're going to use ambiguous and say, I don't know. Okay. Again, if you want to give this a shot yourself, I would pause the video here and try to tackle the next picture on your own, see if you get the correct results. So we're going to do it now. So we've got demand increasing. It's going to move to the right. Again, little arrow to show that it's doing that. This time supply is decreasing, so it's going to move to the left. Again, about equal distance, so maybe there-ish. And then again, following the same steps, let's find that equilibrium. So S2 is here, D2 is here, so we're looking right about there. Dot, dot. Again, My drawings are not perfect, but I can tell that P2 is up here. And Q2 is somewhere vaguely over here. All right. But again, we get into that same problem. P has clearly increased. Q, it's hard to say. So because it's hard to say, we know for sure that price increases. And if I don't know too much about quantity, I again use that word ambiguous. Right? Final one. We're going to now take demand and decrease it. So again, move it to the left. Something like that. We're going to also decrease our supply. Again, about the same distance. It's pretty close. Oops. And again, this is very repetitive, but practice makes perfect. They intersect here. Well, this time, I don't really know much about the P, but I can definitely tell you that Q has decreased. Right? I can clearly see from here that Q has moved to the left. Price, I don't really know. So if I don't know price, again, ambiguous, if I can spell, ambiguous, and quantity has decreased. Now, you can probably see what I mean by these graphs are messier than the single movements, all right? It is in your best interest to practice these. These tend to make good challenge questions on tests where teachers want to see if you can do the more complex movements, all right? Now, we're nearly done supply and demand. The next video is going to be our last video on supply and demand. And in that video, what we're going to do is talk about some special cases, as well as cover some tips and tricks to make sure you're getting the most value out of these lessons and able to commit some of these ideas to memory a little easier. So I hope you join me for that. Until then, bye-bye. Well, folks, that wraps up another lesson for today. I hope it was helpful. If you found the video valuable, please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions about the content or requests for other topics or subjects you'd like me to cover, please leave a comment below. Until next time, keep learning and make it easy.